When has a gut feeling saved your life? Story 1. I almost got kidnapped once. I was about 23. I was walking down my street a little after dusk. I saw a van approaching a little ahead, with no lights on. I didn't think much of it due to the time of day. The van slowed down and almost started creeping as I was approaching this part of the sidewalk, which had a tall, solid wall fence to a community. This gave me some pause in that quick moment. For me to keep walking, I'd have to go between the wall and the van. In the little time it took me to take a couple of steps, and as the van was getting close, I noticed that the side door was slowly sliding open. The one thought in my mind was, why isn't the light turning on inside the van? When you open the door of a vehicle, the light should come on inside it, unless you deliberately switch that off. And I just ran to the median. I ran in front of the van and across the street, because if they were going to harm me, so be it. But they weren't getting me in one piece. Immediately the van took off like someone had lit it on fire, from a slow crawl to full speed, as I looked after it to see the plates. I noticed it had no plates and still no lights. I called the police, of course. They sent cars out and didn't find the van. I never had anything like this happen again, and I'm just an ordinary person, so I don't suspect it was targeted. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Story 2. Listen to my body. Twice I started having painful period-like cramps, so I made an appointment with my OB/GYN the next day. They immediately gave me an ultrasound and discovered a grapefruit-sized tumor where my ovaries should have been. Certain it was cancer, I was in surgery days later. Thankfully, all the cancer was encapsulated in the tumor, so no chemotherapy was necessary. I did have to go on an estrogen patch, though. A year later, I was sitting in my bathtub and reached out for a towel, felt a weird pain in my left breast. I knew it was cancer. I immediately pulled off the estrogen patch and then went in for a mammogram, first thing the next morning. A few days later, I was having a bilateral mastectomy and reconstruction, which I had insisted on because it was my second cancer diagnosis. The two cancers were unrelated. My doctor wanted me to have a lumpectomy and radiation, but I insisted that I never again wanted to have to tell my daughters that I had cancer. After my surgery, my tumor was tested, and it was determined to be highly recurrent and aggressive. Even though the cancer had not spread into my lymph nodes, I went through 20 rounds of intense chemotherapy in the hopes it will never ever come back. Story 3. About 10 years ago, I had a job that started at 6 a.m. on the weekends. I didn't drive and would take the light rail, which was a 15-minute walk from the house I rented. One dark morning, I saw a person up ahead of me a few blocks away. I usually see people without homes on my walk to the light rail, and most are harmless, just trying to collect cans for deposit or asking for change. But this guy just felt off. I could tell from blocks away that there was something wrong about him. So I crossed the street and grabbed my phone from my backpack because I still had to go to work. And this road was the only way to the light rail. Suddenly I hear a bump. I looked over my shoulder and it was him, with his pants undone. That sound was the sound of his shoes hitting the pavement as he ran towards me. I took off running, screamed, "I'm calling 911," and held my phone to my ear. He must have seen and taken it seriously because he ran the opposite direction from where I ran. I did call 911, but they wanted me to wait there for the officer, and I was like, no way. I said it was because I didn't want to be late for work, but I was terrified of him finding me. I will never forget the sound of his shoes hitting the pavement. Story 4. I was driving a friend home late at night when I was around 21. She lived in a pretty rural area outside of St. Louis, Missouri, and about a quarter-mile from her house was an old abandoned farm and farmhouse. I always thought of this place as non-threatening, as she told me she and her two sisters would go there as kids, and they found an attic full of cool things, including a trunk of vintage women's clothing and old love letters, like something out of a movie. Anyway, I'm driving her home, and it's a hot, humid Missouri summer, and we have the windows open as the late night had offered some cool air. We are also singing at the top of our lungs. We pass the abandoned farm, and I drop her off at her house. I wait long enough to see she makes it inside, and I head back out the way I came. I'm driving along, and I get to almost where the farm is, and I see two things in the road. My danger meter goes off as I had just driven this road, and there was nothing there. I put the windows up and make sure the doors are locked. I get closer and I realize the items are two car batteries spaced out in the road, which was basically a one-lane road, in a way that I would have to get out and move them to drive on the road. I immediately knew I wasn't getting out of the car, so I picked the side of the road that had the lesser ditch and I gunned it. I was driving a little SUV and remember feeling the car run over branches and things in the little ditch. But I just gunned it and got out of there. All the way home, I felt creeped out and kept checking my rearview mirror. I called my friend the next morning and told her what had happened, and we both agreed it was weird. Shortly after that, I moved to another state and didn't think much of it after that. Fast forward to 2 to 3 years later, when I was back visiting my hometown, I randomly ran into my old friend, and she ran up to me with wide eyes and grabbed my arms. She asked me if I remembered what I told her that night. I said yes, and she proceeded to tell me that not too long after that had happened, her family was awakened in the middle of the night to someone pounding on their sliding glass door. Her dad went to check and saw 2 injured women and let them in and called 911. They had been abducted from St. Louis City about 40 minutes away by 2 men and brought to the old abandoned farmhouse where the men harmed them. The women somehow managed to get free and ran to the only light they could see, the light over my friend's garage. They survived, but the men were never caught. There was evidence the men had been going there for a while. My friend was convinced they had put the batteries in the road to lure me out of the car. I'm just really glad my instinct told me not to. Story 5. I had just left my apartment complex and was heading to a friend's. I pulled out of my driveway and up to the traffic light and stopped. I was in the left turn lane. Light was red. It was laid out and there weren't many people on the road. I watched as the light went yellow and then red for through traffic. One guy ran the tail end of the yellow like usual. My turn. Light goes green. I have an arrow blinking for me to turn left. I looked both ways and there was no one around, and I just didn't go. I cannot explain what happened other than something inside me just said, "Don't go." So I sat there staring at the green light. A couple of seconds later, a car came speeding through the red light, through the intersection, probably doing about 100 kilometers per hour in the lane I would have been turning into. They were going so fast their vehicle had a bounce to it. If I had turned, my car would have been destroyed, and me along with it. I sat there through the whole next light cycle and then turned, pulled over, and called my sister. It was a ghostly feeling. I am a light jumper. I look both ways, but I am impatient. And I cannot explain what stopped me from going the second that light went green, but I'm glad it did. Story 6. I was like 8 or 9 when my parents took me and my younger brother to stay the night at my paternal grandparents' house because they were in the middle of divorcing. They lived in a farmhouse that was connected to a barn, with machinery, gasoline tanks, and hay on the ground floor, and furnished rooms on the floor above that. And the room we were supposed to stay in was in that barn. As soon as we went into the guest room, I was overwhelmed by panic and felt really dizzy. I turned around and just said that we will not sleep in that room, and we spent the night on the couch in the living room instead. Later that night, a gas leak in the barn ignited, and almost the entire barn, including the guest rooms on its top floor, exploded. Maybe I had that weird feeling because the gas had leaked into the room already, but no one else felt anything, and I'm sure I would be dead if I hadn't noticed it. Story 7. Escaped the abduction of me and my friends, thanks to my gut feeling. I was at the mall with my friends, all of us around 12 years old. It was 8 p.m., and my mom was on her way to pick me up. We were all hanging out together until each of our parents got there to get us. As we were standing outside a store near one of the side entrances, a man came up to us. He was about 30-ish, wearing huge glasses and carrying a clipboard. The man said, "Hey guys, do you want to watch some movie trailers and answer surveys about them? I'll pay you each $5 per trailer." Naturally, my friends were all for it. The thing is, my heart dropped as soon as I heard it. As they were all saying yes, the man nodded and then pointed to the side entrance. It was pitch black outside, and that entrance led to the back parking lot of the mall, which is always deserted. Then he said, "We can do it over there." My friends started to follow the man as he walked toward the glass doors, and I was trailing behind them. Then, as we got close enough for me to kind of see what's outside, I noticed a van parked right outside the entrance. The headlights were on, the car was running, The back doors seemed to be open. Every part of my being screamed, "No, don't go!" I stopped in my tracks and loudly said, "Guys, my mom is here to pick us all up. I don't think we have time for it." The man froze and kept his eyes trained on the doors, and I could see his jaw clenching tightly. My friends looked at me with confusion, and I tried to give them the most terrified expression of warning that I could. Thankfully, they got the message and said bye to the guy. The man refused to turn to look at us and simply began to walk outside of the mall. As we were walking away, I turned and looked behind me one last time. The van and the man were gone. Story 8. Told this story before here, but I used to date a girl who I would go see every night after I got off work. I worked until midnight. I would stay at her house until about 1 or 2 a.m. Sometimes as I left her house, she would follow me in her car and stop at a nearby all-night grocery store. I always begged her not to, but she always said she'd be fine. Sometimes I would wait in the parking lot until she came back out, and then we'd go our separate ways. Sometimes I wouldn't. One time I felt ill, so as we left she said, "Just go straight home, I'll be fine. I always am." But for some reason I felt like that was the night I needed to be there. She thought I went straight home. I was in the parking lot as she pulled in, but she didn't see me. As she walked in, a shady-looking dude was walking out. She ignored him, but he looked back at her about 3 or 4 times. Then he got to his truck, and another guy was in there. They talked through the window for a minute, looking back at the store a couple of times. The second guy got out of the truck, got something out of the back of it. Then they both headed back into the store. I couldn't be sure they were going to do anything, but I wasn't going to take a chance. I went into the store too. I saw them going past every aisle and then motioned to each other like, "There she is." So I walked a bit faster to catch up. I turned into the aisle just as they were approaching her. They were looking at each other. From behind I yelled, "Hey!" They both turned, and so did my girlfriend. I brushed by them and gave them a look. I had some muscle back then and was 6'4", and said, "Hey guys." They nodded awkwardly as my girlfriend said to me, "What are you doing here?" I kissed her and made up some story about wanting to buy aspirin. The 2 guys left. I never told my girlfriend that story. I don't know why. I kind of felt like a superhero to myself. We dated about 2 more years after that. I don't know what they were going to do to or with her, but it was nothing good. Story 9. I was maybe 6 years old and playing with a friend of mine at the playground. An older man came and asked me if my friend and I would like to play at his private playground. I remembered my mom telling me not to interact with or go anywhere with strangers, so I declined. I was sure as a kid that he had a private playground and was actually kind of mad at myself for not saying yes. Years later, I was 25 and walking home alone from a club, being tipsy. Suddenly I remembered this man from my childhood, and it occurred to me what that really was. I saw in the corner of my eye 2 guys behind me, one leaning on the wall, the other one just nodding and walking out of my perspective. Got chills like crazy. All of a sudden, this guy locked me in his arms, trying to touch me. I said no. He didn't stop. No one was around. So I said, "Let's just walk," because I was convinced that the other guy was just waiting as well. We walked. He held me super close to him. I asked him for his jacket because I thought I could run if he struggled with the zipper. He just grinned at me, held me even tighter, and didn't say a word. So I felt that I was running out of time. Still no other pedestrian in sight. I relaxed my body on purpose while walking. He sensed it and stopped holding me so tightly. I focused for 30 seconds, and right at the moment when he looked back, I punched him as hard as I could on the side of his jaw. He fell to the ground and I ran. Story 10. I was at a pub party being held for my boyfriend's father, but I had a headache that wasn't going away. I had been drinking, but I wasn't drunk. I was just feeling like crap. So I made my excuses and left to walk home alone, as I didn't want to ruin his night with his dad. It was a 10-minute walk, if that, from the pub to our house, and it wasn't properly dark yet. I walked down the street and passed a man sitting on a wall drinking a beer. A minute after I passed, I heard the bottle smash, and then footsteps a little while back. Nothing unusual. It was a main road and there was another pub further along, but something in my gut was screaming something was wrong. So I hurriedly walked to the pub and stopped outside to ask the smokers for a light and a chat as I smoked. I watched him pass by me and then stare at me from across the street for an uncomfortable amount of time. With my gut screaming at me, I asked a bouncer working the doors if he could order me a taxi. A few weeks later, while in the town center, I saw a mugshot of the same dude, wanted for assault. Story 11. I was on a date. He didn't know where I lived or anything. I was always paranoid about that. But things had gone well, and my car was cold. So he offered me to sit in his while mine heated up. He had a remote start. Sure, I would love that. Besides, he had the cutest dog out there too. I sat down, alarm bells went off. The door was intentionally locked. I went to open the door because I was freaking out. It didn't open. It also had a manual switch that could have been used, but it was broken. He mentioned I would have needed a screwdriver to get it unlocked. We were talking about things like religion. When I told him I prayed, he told his dog it was a sign from God. They were going to have to keep me. He looked in the back seat. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a rope in the back seat. He jokingly talked about kidnapping me a few times and was going to put the car into reverse. I laughed right along with him, while praying silently. Something told me to go along with this, so I told him he didn't have to kidnap me to keep me. He also continued to make jokes about tying me up and keeping me locked up in his basement, that nobody would ever know, and I would never be able to leave him. I went on a gut instinct. I told this guy that I knew I shouldn't be saying this, and it's only a first date, but something just felt really right with him. He put the car back into park, looked at me. Really? I went on this nonsense tangent about how I knew it was way too soon to know if there was a connection and didn't want to tell him for fear of freaking him out. I told him I was really bummed I was going out of town for the weekend because that meant there would be no chance of seeing him when I got back. But I had to be getting home, as my friend was expecting me over tonight so we could leave super early in the morning. But I was having so much fun I didn't want to leave. But I would like a real hug before I got in my car. You know the kind, one that requires standing and not being in a vehicle. So he made me promise that he'd hear from me when I got back. Absolutely. He wanted a kiss if it wasn't too soon, and for me to be his girlfriend. Yep, dude, whatever you want. My internal alarms were going off, and I was kind of terrified right then. Car door unlocks. We get out. Hug, I kiss him and try to appear pleasant. Of course I had to tell his dog goodbye, so he rolled down the window for me to give the good boy some pets. Guess what I saw? I saw trash bags and an axe on the floor, got in my car, waved goodbye, and got the hell out of there. Story 12. I don't know if it saved my life, but it at least likely saved me from being harmed. I was on a popular trail that goes along the river through several small towns. I was on a fairly barren part of the trail, about halfway between two towns. Tall grass, higher than my head, on one side. River on the other. I saw a man running solo in front of me. I was a bit faster, so in time I passed him. I noticed that he was suddenly keeping pace with me. He wasn't falling behind as fast as he should. Instead, he was flanking me, just diagonal to me on the riverside. I got a feeling that with one good push, he could have me in the tall grass, and there were no witnesses to see what happened. I gave another 10 seconds before I started panicking. Yeah, this didn't feel right. I whipped out my phone and dialed 911. I didn't push send, but cupped the phone in my hand with the screen facing toward him. I otherwise kept running at the same pace, pushing myself to the next town. I noticed within 30 seconds that I didn't hear him as close anymore. I gave it another 30 seconds, counting in my head, then chanced to look. He was gone. I fully stopped to turn around. He was gone. The trail was flat and straight in both directions as far as the eye could see. Where did he go in the span of a minute? Either into the grass or into the river. I can only guess that his reaction validated my feeling that he had bad intentions. This is why I don't run with headphones when I'm running alone, and why I don't trust anyone when I'm out on the trails. Story 13. I was maybe 6 or 7, and my dad and I parked at the library to return a book. He said he'd go do it quickly so we could get home, so he left me in the car, doors locked, etc. Just about when he was out of view, a guy came to the window and asked me to open the door. I rolled down the window a little, and he told me that the car lights were on and to let him in to show me how to turn them off. I don't really know why I didn't. I told him my dad would be back soon, and he'd take care of it then. He kept insisting that I let him in to turn them off, but I wasn't having it. Again, don't know why. I didn't even realize it was a weird situation until I told my dad like 10 minutes later when we were leaving the parking lot, and he swerved over to the side and asked if I could still see him. I didn't. And we left. He got me ice cream because I didn't let a stranger into the car. That day was a win, as far as I know. I know it's not that dramatic and I might not have died. Maybe nothing would have happened. But it still sticks with me just due to how my dad reacted. Story 14. I was probably about 9 or 10 when this happened. We were driving to a park for the afternoon or evening, and I got this feeling that we shouldn't be on the road. Traffic had been backed up for a while, but I could not shake the feeling. I asked my dad to pull over at the upcoming rest stop. He put up a big fuss about it, but pulled over and let me run to use the bathroom. We loaded the car back up, got back on the road, and traffic was still inching along. By this point, the feeling had mostly gone away. We were on the road for like 2 minutes before a car going the opposite direction hit another car, sent that car flipping over the median, and took out the 6 cars that were around us when we pulled over. Had we not stopped, we would have been in the middle of that accident. It was terrifying. My parents, luckily, were able to call for help and had first aid training, so they were able to help at the scene. Amazingly, nobody suffered any major injuries beyond a few scrapes or bumps. After that, they never questioned the Lord's influence over the bladder. Story 15. I don't know if this necessarily saved my life, but it did save me in some way, I think. There was a group of friends I had in high school into college who were very open with alcohol, drugs, and sex. I was always so buttoned up, and they taught me how to relax my spirit, be more honest with my voice, with and without alcohol or drugs. I learned how to listen to my thoughts, communicate them clearly, listen to what I wanted, etc. I trusted them, and they seemed to have found the magic balance between not enough and too much with these so-called illicit substances. When we got to college, a couple of them dropped off the face of the earth, wouldn't answer the phone, disappeared from classes. There were rumors that some had dropped out, and by the time Christmas rolled around, there was a get-together with the old crew. People showed up who I hadn't seen or heard from in months, and they looked completely different, emaciated, skinny, waxy hair, dull eyes. Some of them were just not the same. Vibes creepy enough for me to check out of the party real early, before most people had even shown up. People still talk about the night. It sent one guy to the hospital, another moved across the country to live with an aunt and go to rehab. A woman got in a car crash and lost half her leg. These people who seemed to have been so healthy and safe at one point had gone too far and lost the guardrails I thought they had put up in their own lives. I've always been glad I kept mine when I did, and stepped away from them when I did too. Story 16. I worked in Yellowstone National Park on a black bear, grizzly bear hair snare project. We had 200 trees with barbed wire attached that would snag hair when a bear would rub against it. Every day, our small crew would go out in the backcountry and hike 10 to 20 miles a day to collect hair from the trees. Halfway through the day, while heading back to our car after collecting hair from our third tree, we stopped for a quick lunch. While sitting on a rock and chatting with my crew, I mentioned that I had an uneasy gut feeling and that we should stay hyper-vigilant today. Luckily, my coworker acknowledged my feeling and said she strongly believed in gut feelings, especially in our field work. We packed up our lunch and got to our car with no excitement. Our next hike was about 5 miles long and led to some of our most active bear rub sites. The trees were along a small pond bank on one side and small cliffs and thick brush on the other side. As we approached the cliffs and were just steps from going down into the hole, my co-worker suddenly stopped and laughed to tell us a joke that popped into her head. Just seconds later, we heard a large branch snap down below us in the direction of our snare trees. We knew it was a large animal as we snapped our heads in the noise's direction and saw a large dark rump wiggle under a bush. We knew it was a bear, but in that brief moment, thought it was just a black bear. Knowing a bear was in the area, we weren't going to go down to the trees, but we still had to identify the bear species for our records. Anytime we had a bear encounter, we reported it for the park's bear management team. The three of us were standing up on a small cliff face, maybe 15 feet off the ground from where the bear was. We did our protocol of announcing our presence by clapping and yelling, "Hey bear!" so the bear wouldn't spook too much. When our yelling didn't give us a good sight of the animal, I threw a small rock off the cliff, which ricocheted off a large log and made quite an echo. Despite all the noise, the bear didn't budge. We waited another 3 minutes with no movement when we heard a small twig snap, and suddenly the bush exploded with the power of a charging grizzly bear. The grizzly powered over the log at full speed, sprinting right towards the cliff we were standing on. It covered the 60 feet in split seconds, but it was enough time to see the classic dish shape of its face and for my brain to acknowledge the danger we were in. In those brief seconds, our training kicked in, and we grabbed our bear spray, stood side by side, and yelled our lungs off. The bear ran to the base of the cliff, but we had backed up a few feet away and didn't know where the bear had gone. It easily could run up the rocks on either side and attack us any second. We continued being loud and kept bear spray in hand, but slowly backed away from the area. We didn't see the bear again, and we hiked out in the opposite direction. I have never been so spooked on a hike before, and probably screamed 3 times when squirrels ran across my path. After it all, I was amazed at how calm and prepared my body was when put in a dangerous situation. I literally ninja rolled my backpack onto my back while preparing my bear spray, and immensely baffled at the agility of a 300-pound bear to sprint across the forest floor in 3 seconds. Who knew that a gut feeling would protect us from a grizzly bear attack just hours later? Story 17. This isn't really a gut feeling, but when I was 11 or 12 and had just started secondary school, I was walking to school by myself, which took around 40 minutes from where I lived. And I noticed a really scruffy man with a beard, camo outfit, and a cap. I couldn't really see his full face, by the way. Walking behind me, I got a really bad vibe from him. I didn't know what to do because I was weak and defenseless. Anyway, I decided to see if he was actually following me. My big brain said to go down the shortcut. As I turned, he did too. I started to have a panic attack, and tears came down my face. Trying not to make it obvious that I was alarmed, I looked at him using my peripheral vision while slightly turning my head, and it felt like my heart dropped and was beating so rapidly out of my chest. I thought this was it. I was going to die. However, I was getting closer to the end of the alleyway, and I heard and saw in the front yard of the house right there an older woman and a young woman who was putting a baby in their car. I felt so relieved and happy. I turned my head, and the guy was walking away, back where he had come from. I didn't tell anyone for months, as I thought I would be grounded or get in trouble. I wish I had, because he may have made others feel as uncomfortable as I did. Story 18. I used to work in IT, and I was helping my company move equipment from our old office space to our new location. It required me to park my car in a very small alley in the downtown area of Chicago, the Loop for those who know. The security officer told me that he would watch the camera to see when I got there, so they could open up the big gate for the service entry. The gate was about 30 feet wide and 20 feet tall, and it was one of those roll-up types. I parked, got out of my car, and looked up at the camera. He must have been watching, because the gate started opening up right away. I was going to duck under it once it got to about 4 feet high, but had a momentary gut feeling not to do that. As soon as I took a step backward instead of going forward, the axle broke on one end, and the entire 60-square-foot steel gate came crashing down. If I had gone under the gate, I would have been crushed. As it was, in my panic, I scrambled backward to the alley wall opposite the gate and missed falling down a 4-foot window, well by just a couple of inches. The security guard was amazed and relieved that I was all right. Story 19. Not necessarily life-saving, but still enough to make me think a little harder about my choices. This past winter, during the first week of December, the week before finals for me, I was invited out to go drinking one night. I had never spoken to these people, nor do I drink, so I told them that I'd let them know that night. I got back to my dorm room after my jazz band class and immediately got a case of the shutters. I let them know I had to study and stay in. I was just playing Battlefront, but that's irrelevant. And they went out and did their thing. After about 90 minutes, it's now around 7:30 p.m., I got a knock on the door from campus police. Apparently, someone had decided to report the people going to the party. That person was not me. And they asked me where they'd gone. I told campus police they had headed to one of the frat houses, and they left, presumably to investigate the party. I went about the rest of my night, not really caring about what was happening, and went to bed like normal. I woke up the next morning, curious about what had happened to have campus police called to break up a party. They usually don't care about underage drinking or marijuana. As it turned out, a bunch of people, guys and girls alike, were being drugged that night as part of an initiation to the frat. Had I gone, I have no doubt I would have been one of the people targeted. I'm so thankful for being an introvert. Story 20. When my sister and I were teenagers, we camped a lot with our parents in a state park. We almost always had a couple of our friends with us. And we weren't ugly ducklings, and we were very outgoing, so we almost always attracted friends for the weekend. I say that to explain that we weren't suspicious of boys or young men who talked to us, struck up conversations, or wanted to hang around with us. We were just typical teenagers. One particular weekend, we, four of us girls, had been swimming in the lake and playing on the beach area for most of the day. So we decided to walk down to the bathhouse and shower. It was a busy place with probably about 6 shower stalls on one end of the building and toilet stalls on the other, with sinks and windows in the middle where you walked in. When we walked up, there was a young man, early 20s maybe, standing outside the women's side of the bathhouse leaning on a rock wall. We didn't think anything of it, since we assumed he was waiting for someone he knew to come out. But the way the building was set into a hillside, the windows were at ground level outside, but higher on the wall when inside. Nothing to see in the area of the windows unless someone chose to walk through in their underclothes. As we walked in, I glanced up to see the guy looking into a window. Still not a huge deal due to the window location. Maybe he was just checking to see if his person was about to exit. We got inside, joking and laughing. One woman already inside exited, and it was just us four. We headed into the shower area and decided it would be a good idea to start off showering with our swimsuits on to rinse the sand and lake water out. Lycra, you know. So we all claimed a shower stall and started the process. As we were showering, talking back and forth, I got an overwhelming feeling that I needed to peek outside of my shower. As I cautiously peeked around my curtain, there stood that guy with his hand on my sister's shower curtain about to open it. I let out the fiercest scream as I lunged for him. About the same time my sister saw his feet and did the same. Then, of course, the other two girls followed suit, not really knowing yet what we were doing. That guy took off like lightning with 4 brave and angry teenage girls chasing him. He jumped in a truck and sped off, but dropped a big metal pipe he was carrying in the process. Then we freaked out. Park rangers and police were called, but as far as I know, he was never caught. I have no idea what made me feel like I needed to look out. I didn't hear anything except teenage giggling, singing, and laughter. But I'm glad I followed my gut. Story 21. Here's a sad one. Back in the early 2000s, before I got sober, I used to drink at a bar called Bordner's on Hollywood Boulevard in Los Angeles. The bouncer was a semi-pro bodybuilder named Daniel Arziadian. He was a very decent and kind guy who was just covered in muscle. He used all kinds of stuff to get that way. Back then, I was completely out of control. Carried a gun, did drugs, and drank hard and steady all night. Danny used to walk me past security so I wouldn't get patted down, with the agreement that if he needed that kind of help, I wouldn't hesitate. It's not that I like violence, but after previous life experience, I saw it as a necessary evil. I didn't go looking for it. But if it found me at 2:15 a.m., it was going to be awful for them. I was doing all kinds of reckless things that put me in danger, and several people had previously tried to rob me. Saturday night was a goth club called Bar Sinister. Still going, I think. And Friday was a dance, hip-hop, whatever night. On a Friday night, I was at the front hanging out with Danny. We were talking and laughing as he was checking IDs before sending people down the hall to get patted down. This little guy shows up, covered in sweat and pretty rude. About 5 feet tall with 6'6" worth of attitude. Danny was cool with him, but his size seemed to freak the little guy out. After Danny carded him, the little guy said, "I'm not afraid of you, you know that?" Danny told him there was no need to be, just be cool. The guy did a lot of puffing up and breathing through his nose. He went down the hall, realized he was going to get searched and turned around and jogged out. 10 minutes later, he came back. Danny waved him through. He got patted down, and life went on. There was a girl there I was into. We hung out occasionally. Super attractive, danced on a riser in the bar, and really nice. We did a line or two, and I was just hesitant to ask her out. I had a bad habit of talking to her chest, and I suspect she thought I was a jerk for it. Honestly, I was. Anyway, a few hours into the night, I bumped into the little guy and apologized. He got angry for a second, and I bought him around. He calmed down and told me he wasn't from here. The guy made me really nervous. He offered me a line, and suddenly I understood why he was covered in sweat. The line was huge, and he had at least half an ounce in the bag. Nobody sane walks around with that much in one bag. That pretty much guarantees a long prison sentence. He started showing interest in the girl I mentioned, saying he was going to get her, and so on. I didn't say much. He was clearly unstable. He couldn't stop talking or sweating and kept claiming he was connected. The more he talked, the more I knew this was going to end badly. "I can take anyone in this bar. Want to see?" "No thanks." "You got my back?" I said I didn't want trouble. He insisted it was cool. The whole scene gave me chills. I didn't want to be there anymore. Time to get on my bike and go home. Maybe watch something, do a few lines and relax. As I left, I saw the little guy throwing 20s at the girl dancing on the riser. She wasn't taking the money, so he kept picking it up and throwing it again. This wasn't a strip club. On my way out, I told Daniel I was leaving, gave him a hug, and warned him about the guy. Told him he was high and out of control. Daniel said he had already warned him twice. I got a really sad feeling and told him to be careful. He nodded, and I left. Next time I went to Bordner's, there was a huge stack of prayer candles, flowers, and cutout pictures from bodybuilding magazines next to the entrance. When I asked Lamont what happened, he said someone ambushed Daniel and shot him 10 times, emptied the magazine on him at 3:30 a.m. while he was walking to his car after work. To this day, there's little doubt in my mind how that happened. Even though no one else saw it, there was a small blip in the LA Times about it. Its steroid use had weakened his immune system, and he died 3 days later. He was a semi-pro bodybuilder, and my friend, he left behind a wife and a small child. Story 22. When I was 7 or 8 years old, I used to hang out with my dad while he worked a late-night shift at a military post. Being a younger kid with too much energy, I would wander around the post, which looked a lot like an old high school. Since he worked the night shift, there weren't usually any other soldiers or staff there, so it was rare for me to run into anyone while exploring. One day I was in the gymnasium and saw this older guy sitting by the edge of the court, up on a stage area. I had seen him around before, and I think I remember my dad telling me he was an older veteran who worked as a part-time janitor there. He waved me over to talk and started discussing the hat he had on. I thought it was cool, so he asked me if I wanted to go into his office to pick one out from his collection. Again, I had seen this man before and trusted him since my dad knew him and he worked at the post. The older man led me to a door behind the stage, and I walked into his office. He immediately shut the door behind us and sat me down on an old dingy couch. He grabbed a few hats and sat down next to me. He kept asking me weird questions about how my doctors and parents had told me to stay away from strangers and never let them touch my private parts. He kept bringing this up, and each time he would grab his crotch as if to demonstrate. He did this for a few minutes before standing up and grabbing a screwdriver from his bench. He sat down even closer to me and started to push the screwdriver into my leg until I pulled away in pain. I immediately ran to the door, sprinted off the stage, and across the gym to find my dad. After telling him what happened, he quickly called someone and had them meet him at the post, and he also called my mom to take me home. That was about 20 years ago, and it's never really been a topic we've discussed. It's one of those things we all acknowledge happened, but don't talk about in detail. Story 23. This is going to sound fake, but for the longest time I've been able to hold on to dreams that felt insanely realistic. For whatever reason, A lot of these dreams pop up later as deja vu. I had a dream that I was in the backseat of a car for the company I was working with, which did self-driving automation. This meant the car drove itself based on cameras and sensors. In the dream, our car made a faulty left turn into an intersection and ended up getting hit by a black Cadillac Escalade. The dream ended there. About 2 months later, we came up to an intersection when the deja vu hit. I noticed the same building, the same position of the car I was sitting in, behind the passenger seat, and the same daytime lighting. The deja vu was overwhelming, and I immediately told my driver that I was uncomfortable and wanted to take over the vehicle for any turns. The driver asked why, and I told him I had seen our crash in a dream. Just as our light turned red, our car began to creep into the intersection to turn left, and the driver hit the brakes. A black Cadillac Escalade barreled through the intersection, easily capable of doing serious damage to our $400,000 vehicle and seriously hurting us. Thanks to the deja vu, we avoided a serious accident. We headed back to base to recap the situation and report it. Story 24. Not a story where my life was in danger, but it could have been much different. One day my friend and I were just hanging out. Someone messaged me saying, "Get over here, we've got drinks and pills." Being the young addict I was, I went. We got destroyed. Someone had managed to get bottles of vodka. We were like 17 or 18. And it turned into a full-on mess. After a few hours, I thought to myself, things are getting loud. I might leave before this gets out of hand. So I dipped. On my way home, I saw a cop. I waited for him to pass, but he motioned toward me. Great, I was in no condition to function, much less talk to a cop. I walked over. He asked if there was a problem. I said no. He had just motioned to me. He told me he was just waving me to cross. I was already feeling anxious. Then he asked where I was going. I said I was heading home and pointed down the street. He stared at me for what felt like minutes, then just said, "Go home, kid." I thanked him and walked off. The second I got home, I got a text from my friend saying the cops had just busted everyone at the party. The cop let me go because he knew he was about to catch more people just a few yards away. If that officer had decided I was worth stopping, my life would be much different. If I had stayed 5 more minutes, I'd probably have a record now. Somehow, I've never been arrested, which is rare for the friend group I had back then. Story 25. This happened in early April 2016. At the time, I worked in public accounting, and it was the busiest time of the year. Out of the blue, my left testicle swelled up overnight. I thought it was bruised, so I let it play out for a week. After no changes and no pain, my gut started telling me it might be something serious. When I got into work Monday morning, I grew more anxious and paranoid about it. I asked my boss if I could go to the emergency room, and he said it was fine. Luckily, one of my best friends worked there and was able to expedite the process. After some blood tests, they told me my tumor markers were high and that there was a strong chance I had testicular cancer. To remove it, they would have to take out the affected testicle. I had never been in a situation like that before and was scared, so they gave me a couple of days to think it over. They couldn't do a biopsy because of the risk of spreading cancer cells, so it was an all-or-nothing decision. By Wednesday morning, I told them to go ahead with the surgery. They had wanted to do it that night, but I was a huge Lakers fan and didn't want to miss Kobe Bryant's final game. Rest in peace. That evening, I felt peace knowing I was following my gut and doing the right thing. I had the surgery the next morning and was out of the hospital by Friday evening. A couple of weeks later, I got my results. The biopsy and blood work confirmed it was one of the most aggressive forms of cancer, and the urologist said if I had waited longer, it could have spread. Almost 4 years later, I'm still being monitored, and I've been lucky not to have any setbacks. I hope this post brings more awareness to testicular cancer. If you notice anything unusual, don't hesitate to get checked. It's not the most common or deadly cancer, but as guys, we often hesitate out of embarrassment. There's nothing wrong with having a testicle removed if needed. It doesn't make you any less. I'm thankful I listened to my intuition. It might have saved my life. Story 26. I was about 13 at the time, just walking home from the mall around 9:22 p.m. Being the introverted guy I was, I had my headphones on at full volume. I usually took the same route, But ahead I had to go through a crowded intersection and a packed sidewalk, which always made me uncomfortable. That day, the lights looked even brighter than usual, and something made me turn around to take the longer way home. I thought, at least I'll get to listen to music a little longer. About 6 minutes later, the song I was listening to ended, and I heard a deafening bang. I turned around instinctively and saw it had happened at the intersection I'd avoided. Now curiosity took over, and I ran toward it. I saw a large fire, and what looked like a mangled bicycle. I immediately turned and ran home the long way. The next day, my mom was watching the news while I was playing Brawlhalla, and something caught my attention. Sure enough, it was about the explosion from the night before. Officials said a man had attempted to murder his son and a 66-year-old man in a car using a pipe bomb. Story 27. I was cycling one night and saw a man give me a long, weird look while I was waiting at a traffic light to cross a street. He looked out of it, like he was on something. I'm a bartender. And I recognized that look. I had a strong feeling he was going to follow me and that I needed to get away fast. As soon as the light changed, I started pedaling as fast as I could. So did he. I could hear him behind me. Then I slowed down to test it. He did the same. He really was following me. I realized that if I wanted to get away safely, I needed to create a scene around other people. My house was in a quiet area, darker and more isolated. I didn't want to lead him there. I sped up until I saw some people walking on the sidewalk coming back from a bar. I could hear him closing in on me. Right as I passed them, I braked hard, causing him to crash into me and fall. While everyone was watching, I screamed, "What do you want? Why are you following me?" He got up and awkwardly muttered that he just wanted a light. I told him to leave me alone, and he took off. I stayed with those people until I couldn't see him anymore, then took a different route home. I'm 100% sure he was up to something, and I'm glad I trusted my instinct and got away. Story 28. My best friend in high school sometimes scared me with her driving. One winter day, we were hanging out and she suggested we drive to a bigger town about an hour away. Right away, I had a bad feeling, like she was going to crash and that I shouldn't go. I declined and told her to drive carefully. I didn't want her to think I was being paranoid since she was always a bit of a know-it-all. I ended up having a boring afternoon at home alone. That night, she called to say she had crashed. She hit ice and went over an embankment. She told me it was lucky I didn't come because the passenger side was totaled. Thankfully, she was okay. The police actually charged her with not driving according to the road conditions. A couple of years later, another good friend invited me to stay over. I agreed but had a weird feeling. Everything felt off, like I was looking through blurry glasses. I even told my parents I had a strange feeling and that I loved them, just in case. They didn't want me to go, but I went anyway. He picked me up and we started driving down the highway. It was very dark and empty. We were laughing and talking when he casually changed lanes. And in the headlights, we saw a moose in the lane we had just left. It was so close we could have reached out and touched it. The moose was massive, even bigger than the SUV we were in. We pulled over and freaked out. He said if we hadn't switched lanes, we'd be dead. I think I was just lucky that time. I read somewhere that everyone has exit points in life, moments where death is a possible outcome. Looking back, I think that was one of mine. One more weird thing. When I was around 8, we lived in an old house in the middle of a big city. One day I was home with my sibling, and I was alone downstairs playing on the computer. Someone knocked on the back door. As I walked over to answer, I heard a voice in my head as clear as day say, "Ask who it is." So I loudly asked who was there. No one answered. I looked through the keyhole, it was an old house, and saw camel-colored work pants. A man was standing in our backyard. He didn't respond, so I went back to the computer. Hours later, I asked my dad who had been at the back door, and he looked very alarmed. Story 29. I'm not too sure if it saved my life, but it certainly saved me and my brother from a dangerous situation. I was in the car with my dad and my younger brother, who was probably around 3 at the time. Making me 9, my dad parked and quickly popped into the shops, maybe 20 meters from where we were parked. Keep in mind this was in the middle of the town hall area, very busy, people everywhere. Not somewhere you'd expect a potential crime to occur. In the distance, for some reason, I noticed this man. I don't remember many details other than he was skinny, wearing all black, and dark-skinned. He was acting very suspiciously, looking around anxiously until he stopped beside the car. I looked out the window where he was standing, and it looked like he was trying to open the car door. I could just about see his face and knew he could see mine. I could hear him pulling on the handle harder and harder, and there was a jingle that sounded like keys. Again, this was broad daylight, with lots of people walking past, and I have no idea what his intentions were. But that's when I went into panic, shutdown protection mode. My gut almost forced me into doing this. I pretended my dad was coming and pointed in a random direction with my brother, loudly saying, "Look, there he is." He wasn't there. I was just hoping this guy would see and bolt. He must have heard or at least seen it because he kept looking over in the direction I was pointing until he suddenly stopped and ran off across the road, right when my dad walked out of the store. Now this is the scariest part. I remember going on Google after this incident, not too sure how long after, but definitely under a month, and I saw a news article on the local site looking for the same man. It said he was on the run after being suspected of stabbing 2 people in unprovoked attacks while stealing a car in the process. I dread to think what could have happened if the car doors had been unlocked. Story 30. I was walking down the street in the summer in downtown Toronto when a man in a very fancy car pulled up. He started saying I was someone he knew. I laughed it off and said, "No, that's not me. I get it all the time. I must just have one of those faces." He kept insisting, giving me details that I was this waitress who worked at a restaurant he goes to. I kept saying no and started walking away. He then asked where I was going. I lied easily, saying I was meeting a friend at the AGO, which was actually what I had done the day before. Right now, I was just walking. He offered to drive me there, mentioning how nice his car was. That's when the gut feeling kicked in. He was trying to get me into the car, so I continued to play along and said, "Nope, all good. My friend's walking towards me, and I don't want to miss her." I quickly walked past and slowly moved diagonally further from the road. I even remember later that night wondering if I had overreacted. Not that I should have gotten in the car, but maybe his intentions weren't what I assumed. 10 years later, I read an article in the newspaper about a group of women who were rescued from a human trafficking ring. The women had initially gotten into fancy cars with young, attractive men who pretended to know who they were. They were even taken from the same street where it had happened to me. I nearly fainted realizing I could have been one of those women. Story 31. My parents divorced when I was 5. When I was 8, my mother moved to Georgia. I live on the West Coast because her new husband got stationed there. They visited for a week when I was 10, and my older brother wasn't happy. He wanted to stay in Georgia because of his girlfriend. Every night they visited, I stayed at my grandma's house with them and stayed up until 1 a.m. with my cousin, who was around the same age. Every night, my brother checked on us every 30 minutes. On the last night, they had to leave at 7 a.m. the next morning, so my cousin and I were told to go to bed early. That night, I woke up at 2 a.m., went to get a drink of water, and told my cousin to come with me because I was scared of the dark. My brother had stolen the keys to my grandma's truck, driven it halfway to the airport, 30 minutes away, got pulled over, panicked, drove back home with police chasing him, and crashed into the house. He demolished the room where my cousin and I were sleeping. When I walked to the room after the house stopped shaking, almost 2 walls were gone, and in between the front of the truck and what was left of the wall, I could see 10 police officers with guns ordering my 17-year-old brother to the ground. Story 32. It didn't save my life per se, but it definitely saved my identity. I posted my resume on the Indeed job site, and a couple of days later, I got a sketchy email saying they received my resume from a recruiter and were wondering if I was interested in a job. I replied saying I was. The woman on the other end emailed me later that day from a more official-looking address, and the tone of the message felt professional, like a real recruiter. It all seemed legit. She said I was preliminarily approved for a list of jobs in a Word document she attached. The jobs matched my resume pretty well. She asked me to complete 7 questions as an interview because of the pandemic. That made sense, as I had just done a video interview the day before because of the same reason. I completed the questions and emailed her back with the position I wanted. The next day, she sent me a job offer contract. That's when I got suspicious. I had applied for a full-time data entry clerk job with decent pay and was offered the position after answering just 7 basic questions. That didn't feel right. So I Googled the company address in her email signature, and it turned out to be a tattoo parlor. Then I tried calling the company's phone number that she listed multiple times, but it was always busy. I messaged her again, expressing concerns about the situation, and I never heard back. My eagerness to get a job nearly cost me my identity. I'm really glad I followed my instincts. Story 33. My boyfriend and I were on a road trip once. We were driving through Tennessee on a 5-lane highway, doing 70 miles per hour just like everyone else. We crested a slight hill, and there was a sea of stopped cars. No signage to indicate roadwork. No flashing lights from ambulances or cruisers. No reason that I could see for all these cars to be stopped. It was totally without warning. I slammed on the brakes, and for a split second, I was positive I was about to hit the car in front of us at high speed. My boyfriend yelled for me to swerve into the left shoulder, which looked wide open, to avoid the impact. I immediately got a bad feeling about doing that and pressed my foot as hard as I could into the floor. I stopped maybe 4 inches away from hitting the car in front of us. The second I stopped, an 18-wheeler came barreling up the left shoulder, right where we would have been if I had swerved. Many others narrowly avoided crashes as well. So why were all those cars stopped? Because a police officer was walking into the middle of the highway to pick up an empty, discarded McDonald's bag. Story 34. One Sunday, I was coming back to campus after spending the weekend at home with my parents. I stopped at the gas station near the dorms to use the ladies' room and grab some milk for my roommate and me. From the second I walked in, I noticed a man in line staring at me. My instincts immediately started buzzing, but I figured since he was already in line, he'd probably be gone by the time I got out of the bathroom. But when I came back out, he had stepped out of line. He started following me around the store, and when he saw I was just getting milk, he hopped back in line ahead of me, still staring at me the entire time. After he paid, he stood directly outside the door, continuing to watch me. When I reached the cashier, he thankfully was observant and asked, "Do you want to stay here and chat for a while?" I told him yes, thank you very much. So we talked for a few minutes until the guy finally got in his truck and drove off. I thanked the cashier and asked him to watch me walk to my car. Just in case the man was still lurking somewhere I couldn't see, I made it back to my dorm safely. But I've never been so scared. I absolutely knew in my gut that guy meant me harm. And to this day, I believe that both my awareness and the cashier's kindness saved me from something terrible. Story 35. It probably didn't save my life, but I'll share it anyway. I was in 5th grade and going to the YMCA after school. I remember hating it because I was the only 5th grader there, and the only other girls were in kindergarten to 2nd grade. The group leader, let's call him Dave, was a really high-energy guy who talked to the kids like they were his friends. I had a bad feeling about him from the start, and it never went away. At first, I couldn't quite explain the discomfort I felt around him, but gradually I began noticing patterns. These weren't moments of comfort or care. He would simply approach them without any real cause. My younger brother, who was in 3rd grade at the time, was also there. Since our parents worked late, we were usually among the last kids to be picked up, often around 6 p.m. When my brother got hungry, Dave would suggest we go down to the basement, a quiet, empty area where no one else ever seemed to be. I knew about stranger danger and always listened to my instincts. I begged my brother to wait for Mom, but he insisted on going to get food, so I always followed, just to make sure nothing weird happened. I don't remember what happened to Dave. He eventually transferred to a YMCA camp. I don't know for sure if he was a creep, but I had the strongest feeling that he was. It's the first thing that came to mind when thinking about instincts, even if it might not exactly fit here.